This is the lecture for Chapter 3, Key Issue 4 on migration. Why do migrants face obstacles? Let's talk about intervening obstacles as well as intervening opportunities. Intervening obstacles hinder migration, and they can be categorized into two types. One, environmental features, things like mountains, rivers, deserts. A casual glance at a map of the world with any kind of topographical features shown will reveal that there are a lot of natural barriers between countries. In fact, those barriers are often why the borders of those countries are where they are. And so it can be challenging for people to migrate over mountains. Say, looking at India and China with the Himalayan mountains between them, it's not going to be very likely for someone to migrate illegally, especially, or unlawfully between those two countries because of the difficulty. Things like deserts for years and years and years have prevented people from migrating. And you may think that in 2017 this wouldn't be as much of a hindrance, but it truly is. As you saw in the documentary about the unauthorized immigrants attempting to travel from Central America to the United States, even if they made it all the way through Mexico, they still had a desert to cross to get into the United States. Rivers can be obstacles of the same sort. In fact, at the beginning of that documentary, you saw the sad case of several people who had drowned trying to cross the Rio Grande into the United States. So, in general, these environmental features are things that prohibit unlawful immigration because unlawful immigrants usually don't fly in airplanes. And of course, airplanes get you over them. But just thinking spatially, covering large distances, so an ocean, for instance, can be a barrier even to lawful immigration because of the cost of a plane ticket. It just might be too much for some people. Political features are another intervening obstacle. So it's an obstacle that intervenes and prevents you from getting where you wish to go. These can include immigration quotas, which would be a cap that a country may set, saying we're not going to let in any more than this amount of people, or restrictive laws governing who is allowed in. Even in recent news, you may have seen that the executive office has attempted a ban on migration from certain countries, which has been overturned by several judges. But laws such as that can restrict certain groups and not others. Now, intervening opportunities are different. The presence of a near opportunity that greatly diminishes the attractiveness of sites farther away. So, opportunities that cause people to change their minds or prevent people from going to a traditional destination. For example, a rural Kenyan may have a dream to go to America, but find himself in a job in Nairobi. At the crux of intervening opportunities, I believe, is globalization. As the world becomes more connected and more similar, theoretically there will be fewer reasons for people to have to move to the traditional prized destination that is the United States, or to a lesser degree to Europe. And in many ways, Europe is becoming the intervening opportunity in place of America, as more and more people are finding it easier from places like North Africa and Southwest Asia to go to Europe rather than coming to the United States. But again, as I give you in this example, someone might not even end up leaving their country because it's very difficult for them to, and they can still get a job in a city, which is why we're seeing so much migration from rural to urban. let's talk about migration control. So if you are the government of a country, your job is to protect your country, and your desire, of course, is to make the economy as best as it can be and make people's lives, the lives of your citizens, as best as it can be. So governments are concerned about controlling migration. Many countries have adopted, many net in migration countries especially, those that are attractive to migrants, have adopted selective immigration policies. Preferences are shown for specific employment placement and family reunification. A little bit of history here. Passing of the Quota Act in 1921 and the National Origins Act in 1924 by the U.S. Congress marked the end of unrestricted immigration to the U.S. In the decades leading up to that, we had really unbridled immigration. Of course, a large dip during the Great Depression, which coincides with these acts, but you had a massive amount of people moving, mostly from Europe, and these put a cap on that. The global quota today is 675,000 people a year, so that's how many people are allowed to come in. You might be filling out all the paperwork, and you might be in a great spot, but if that quota has been met, you're going to have to wait. Now, in the United States, the reunification of families is the top priority for admittance when determining who gets to come to the United States and receive citizenship. And then priority is given to immigrants with skills that are valuable to the U.S. economy, such as someone medically trained, like this doctor here, and then protecting refugees, and then promoting diversity. So protecting refugees, as far as the numbers go, it is determined by the Congress and the President each year. And we've seen a lot of discussion and clamor about that in recent years with the Syrian crisis. And the issue of promoting diversity, that you've seen described in or you've heard described in the podcast you listened to about Abdi and his golden ticket. And of course, upon listening to that, you understand the complexity that is there and the inconsistencies within it. It's definitely a challenge, but the goal of that system is to promote diversity, to get people from different parts of the world, even if they are not necessarily skilled laborers. And you will hear when people talk about migration, this idea of skilled labor. And you don't want to get you confused about this, because you see a guy here working on a roof, and as someone who has done that a good bit, I can tell you it does require skill in order to not fall off, in order to do the right thing and make a roof that will actually last, right? So it does require skill, but unfortunately it's not considered skilled labor. So skilled labor in general is someone who has a craft or a trade that they had to go through apprenticeship or years of education to get to. We seem to favor letting these kind of immigrants in, and many other immigrants come in, though, through the family reunification policies. But if you think about it, most Americans want the jobs that they've been educated for. And yet many often complain that these illegal immigrants are coming in and taking their jobs. But the interesting thing is, for most educated Americans, it's not the illegal immigrants that are competing for those jobs. It's usually legal ones. Just a thought. More seek admission to the U.S. than is permitted by the quotas. Thus, preference is shown toward different groups. And like I said, the first preference is given for family reunification. This is a big deal to America. Reunifying families is seen as the main goal of the Immigration Enforcement Agency. About 3/4 of our immigrants each year are let in to reunify families or bring families back together. This brings us to a term known as chain migration, where people migrate to a place because relatives are there. So even though right now we're just talking about what allows people to get in, don't forget that one of our concerns is where are migrants going? And we have discussed that long-distance migrants usually move to cities or urban centers. And we said it's so that because they're more likely to get jobs there, but it's also because they're more likely to have connections there. If you're moving to a new place, it's very helpful to have someone there that you know who can help you out. And a lot of times these people are going to live with family for a time or connect with family there. That's chain migration. But we also want to let in skilled workers. Approximately 1/4 of immigrants are seen as skilled workers. So sending countries' alleged preference for skilled workers contributes to brain drain, a term for the disproportionate amount of highly skilled and intelligent citizens migrating away from sending countries. So there are a lot of people moving here from places like India, and these people happen to be of a certain class in India, at least economically, that they can afford to move to the United States. They can afford the plane tickets, they can afford all the time off work, they can afford to move into an economy with a much higher cost of living, they can afford the education that is required to get the kind of degree, to get the kind of job that we favor here in the United States. And so, from the perspective of the country that is sending, you can imagine this being a detriment because they're losing their doctors, they're losing their scientists and their lawyers, they're losing not only their skilled workers, but also the money that those skilled workers generate, as well as entrepreneurs and people who start businesses. So this is considered brain drain, but it's not just brain drain, it's an economic drain. Diversity is another factor that the United States is interested in. Few immigrants are admitted because their sending country historically sent very few migrants. And that's why you have the lottery system, as was revealed to us in the podcast we listened to about Abdi and the golden ticket. So someone like Abdi, who is Somalian, is not part of a traditional migration group to the United States, and so preference may be given to his particular nationality or ethnicity. Just for the sake of comparison, let's look at the difference between the United States migration or immigration system and Canada's. And by no means will this be exhaustive, just like my explanation of the US's was not exhaustive. But something interesting about Canada's is that they use a point system. So applicants are deemed worthy or not yet worthy based on how they score on a number of factors, including their income, their language proficiency in English or French, their employment, and other factors. And so the result is that they bring in more skilled workers as a proportion to their immigrants than those that are just unifying because they have family here. I know a guy who's married to a Canadian woman. He's an American, and he cannot get a green card to go live up there. He can't get citizenship up there, obviously, either. And he's been trying for over a year. It's just difficult because they don't deem any of his skills too vital to their society right now. He's a teacher, and I guess they have plenty of teachers. So it's actually more difficult to get into Canada than to the United States, which is interesting because Canada seems to be seen as more of an open society, less bigoted, just from what I see in the media and in news and stuff. But it's actually a point system that is used. Now, of course, Canada does care about diversity, and they will bring in people just to shape up the diversity of their country. But from the perspective of Canada, they don't want as many low-wage workers. The United States hasn't really had a choice because of undocumented or unlawful immigration. Let's talk about that. Unauthorized immigration. Unauthorized immigrants are those who enter a country without proper documents. A lot of people call this illegal immigration, but many people chagrin at that because they say no human is illegal. So unauthorized immigration is a bit more politically correct. And I guess just nicer. And that's pretty cool. Characteristics of unauthorized immigrants in the United States. The source country is not completely Mexico. It's about 58%. Now, most people come through Mexico because they're coming from Central America as well. But because Mexico is our neighbor, it accounts for a majority. Of the estimated 11.2 million unauthorized immigrants, nearly 1 million are children. Now, this has been an important fact, or this has been important because unauthorized immigrants giving birth to 4.5 million children on the U.S. soil have been able to make those children U.S. citizens. And to understand this, we have to go back and look at history a little bit. After the Civil War and the emancipation of slaves, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was passed. Now, among other things, this amendment, in pursuit of securing rights for all Americans, stipulates that any child born in the United States, even to foreign residents or people who are not citizens, is immediately a citizen. And so there has been a lot of debate over this law, this very old law, because people can come here unauthorized or illegally, have a child, and that child is now a citizen. So even if their parents are deported and made to go back to their country, that child can then serve as a link for, or a sponsor for people to come to the United States. Because remember, family reunification is a top priority in the U.S. This shows the number of unauthorized immigrants to the United States since 2000. So in a decade's time, it has mostly grown. And from Mexico, it has grown more significantly than other places. But around 2010, it's really slowed down, and that's likely due to the recession that was had. It's just, if there's not as many jobs here in the United States, that means there's definitely not as many for illegal immigrants. Unauthorized immigrants or undocumented. The duration of residency has increased for unauthorized immigrants. In 2010, 35% of adults have been in the U.S. for at least 15 years. Approximately 8 million unauthorized immigrants are employed in the U.S. The largest number of these are living in Texas and California. And when we think spatially, that does make sense because Texas and California both share a border with Mexico. Now, the debate over unauthorized immigration always comes up in election cycles, and if you flip through the news, you're likely to see someone talking about it. Most unauthorized immigrants are working in low-wage, low-skill jobs. And one side argues that they're taking these jobs because most Americans don't want to do it. Most Americans don't want to work in rural areas and agriculture. Most Americans don't want to work in hotels or as custodians cleaning up trash or on hot roofs in the summer, or various other jobs that are not the most glamorous. The other side says by taking these jobs and working for such low wages, often below minimum wage, and they're able to do so because taxes are not taken out from these wages. These immigrants are bringing down the salary of other people, of citizens. So there is this debate, but we're going to look at what most Americans on average believe about illegal immigration. Of course, currently there is a debate over whether there should be a wall or some sort of barrier that stretches all the way across this long border. Let's take a look at the border. Mexico's border with the United States is almost 2,000 miles long. So when someone talks about building a wall, well, it's definitely a lot easier said than done. Let's talk about border patrol, or at least border security. And we have to understand that Mexico has more than one border. The view from the U.S. recognizes motives that compel unauthorized immigrants to enter illegally. So people in the U.S. understand that people from Mexico are looking for employment opportunities because people want to work. That's noble, isn't it? That's admirable that people want to work and provide for their families. People from the U.S. understand that many families want to be reunified. Since people have been coming for decades to from Mexico and from Central America, many just want to be with their families. And the United States offers a better way of life. And Americans are proud of their country and can acknowledge that if they're so happy to be in their country, it makes sense that others would want to be here. But the view from Mexico is more complex. Residents of northern Mexico want compassion to be shown to unauthorized immigrants because many of them have tried to cross the border or have family who have crossed the border. But residents of southern Mexico are less tolerant because they see this immigration crisis as adversely affecting them because, like I said, they have a border down there as well. And so they're seeing all kinds of unauthorized immigration from Guatemala. And you may recall from the documentary of the boys riding the train through Mexico, trying to get to the U.S., that this results in a lot of people just kind of hanging around. And it's often worse than that. When people are desperate, they resort to crime. And so it's just a tough situation for Mexico, and I think we really need to see that. The United States, if the United States is suffering from this, I don't want to say suffering too much, but for lack of a better word, or if this is a problem for the United States, it's also a problem for Mexico. And with security problems, with problems securing the border, there are great concerns for the safety of the people in northern Mexico. Many Americans complain that drugs and unauthorized aliens or immigrants are coming up from Mexico, but indeed guns are going down into Mexico, and money is fueling a lot of the violence from the drug cartels, and guns smuggled from the United States often are resulting in massive casualties and murders throughout northern Mexico. So it's a problem on both sides indeed. All right, let's talk about how Americans feel about immigration in the United States. Because it's not actually like this. I just had to put that in there. Most views, and this is based on a number of polls taken of Americans recently, most views of immigration by U.S. citizens are actually ambivalent in nature. Meaning they could kind of go either way. They're not too concerned about it. It's not a top priority for most Americans. That doesn't mean that you won't turn on the TV and see some people screaming about it. There are definitely people who feel very concerned. We have to understand that most Americans don't share a border or don't live in states that share a border with Mexico. And so they're going to be less concerned than those people who are on or close to the border. And among the young, among the millennial generation, immigration does appear to be in. A casual glance at Instagram, and you see young people are very concerned with diversity, and diversity is very stylish. In fact, just talking to people and talking to some of my students and friends, people always want to talk about how they're half Filipino and 3/4 Italian and 1/29th Cherokee. Basically anything other than boring old Anglo-American. So I think it is stylish. And I think that the benefit of that is that people become more open-minded and interested in other people's way of life and open to other cultures. The Border Patrol would like, as far as Border Patrol, and so we're going to break this down into topics. As far as Border Patrol, people would like more effective Border Patrol, but they don't really want to spend the money to solve the issue. As far as the workplace goes, most recognize that unauthorized immigrants take jobs from U.S. citizens, but they understand most citizens wouldn't take the jobs. So they support a path to U.S. citizenship for these unauthorized immigrants. You got to think about all the unskilled labor, which is going to be low-paying jobs that Mexican Americans perform. Working in hotels, working in lawn care business, working behind the scenes in all kinds of shops, and certainly as chefs and cooks in restaurants. All kind of jobs that many Americans who have the benefit of an education, especially a college education, aspire to find higher paying jobs. And this is kind of this is the showing a wide partisan gap in the views of immigrants and their impact on the U.S. But look what's happened over time. Since 1994, the idea that immigrants are a burden on our country by taking our jobs and our housing and our health care, it has actually declined markedly until 2000, and then it's been somewhat stable since then. Excuse me. And the idea that they actually strengthen our country through hard work and their talent increased in the 90s, has kind of plateaued for much of the 2000s, but recently has seen an upward trend. And you can see the difference between Democrats and Republicans on this issue below. Excuse me. As far as civil rights go, U.S. citizens favor letting law enforcement officials stop and verify the legal status of anyone, but they are concerned that civil rights will be infringed upon those of U.S. citizens as a result of racial profiling. If this makes sense to you, please explain it to me. This is just what the polls gave us. So, to me, I see the citizens of the United States kind of having a confusing opinion of this that seems to contradict itself a little bit. Local initiatives. Polls suggest U.S. citizens believe unauthorized immigration is a pressing matter to the nation, but it should only be dealt with at the federal level and not the local level. Many were opposed to Arizona's 2010 law that obligated foreigners to carry identification with them at all times. More than 100 localities across the nation support additional rights for unauthorized immigrants. Such movement is known as a sanctuary city. So there are some cities, numerous cities along the West Coast in the United States that are often called sanctuary cities because they support unauthorized immigrants. A number of school districts, including our own, have made a pledge that they're not going to discriminate whether a student has been brought here lawfully or unlawfully. They are going to carry on with their main focus, which is just educating whoever is in there. Immigration concerns have been a hot topic in Europe in recent years. Population growth in Europe is fueled by immigration from other regions of the world, a trend disliked by many Europeans. So Europeans dislike seeing outsiders, many Europeans. They dislike seeing outsiders in their country because of the change that it makes. But they're not willing to have big enough families to grow their country's population. As we learned in the last chapter, Europe often has a very, very low birth rate. And so they require immigrants to come in and continue to grow their economies. But the fear is that the host country's culture will be lost because many immigrants adhere to different religions. Many immigrants speak different languages. They practice different food and cultural habits. And to me, this is actually one of the kind of fun things about Europe, is that when I go there, I can go to Ireland and I can have fish and chips. But if I don't feel like it, I can go to the restaurant next door and have a kebab or have falafel or whatever Middle Eastern or Southwest Asian food I'm feeling like having. Hostility to immigrants has become a central plank of some political parties in many European countries. Immigrants are blamed for crime, unemployment rates, and high welfare costs. These concerns are legitimate. I would not agree that all the statements that the blame should be put on immigrants are true at all. But if you're living in a country like France that has seen multiple terrorist attacks from immigrants, it's understandable that you start to be concerned that, well, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe it would just be better if these people weren't here. So I think an understanding of both sides of the issue leads us to a better discussion. Recently in France, there was a presidential race, and the man you see in this picture, Macron, went up against Marie Le Pen, the woman, and she was ultra conservative, and the basis of her platform was basically that France needs to be for French people again, and this unbridled immigration, especially from Islamic countries, is weakening France and making it dangerous. And she had a lot of support because a lot of French people are very concerned that their country is going to be overtaken by this religion, and their country is going to become more susceptible to terrorist attacks as more and more people come from places like North Africa and the Middle East. But she did not win. So the French people still are more liberally minded and overall concerned with civil rights. And so Macron was the one who actually won. It doesn't mean there aren't still a whole lot of concerns in places like France and now Germany, which has recently basically opened their doors and let anyone in as a response to the Syrian refugee crisis. And they are seeing some problems with this, not because necessarily this group of people coming in is inherently bad, but because any group of people is going to have some bad apples in it. And if they're not vetted very well, then you can have some problems. So you're welcome to look that more up on your own, but all I need you to know for this class is that there is a tension there and why that tension exists. This shows some migration flows within Europe. You're welcome to pause this and look at it for a while, but notice the trend is from east to west and south to north. Although we do see a lot of people going into Spain from Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Now there is a certain irony to these immigration concerns in Europe, and that is that Europe was the source of most of the world's immigrants during the 19th century. Much is made about the United States being built by immigrants, being made of immigrants, and this is true, and these were mostly European immigrants that built the United States. Most Europeans fear losing their cultural heritage to that of new immigrants, while Indo-European languages are now spoken by half of the world as a result of European immigrants. So Europeans are afraid that their culture is being taken away, but it was European culture that was spread all over the world and that has, through globalization, overtaken other cultures. I shouldn't say European culture, but we'll say Western culture so that we can include the massive influence from the United States. Christianity, which was of course, a Middle Eastern religion that was spread by Europe, across Europe and then the rest of the world, has the world's largest number of adherents. European art, music, literature, philosophy, and ethics had diffused throughout the world. There's an interesting situation where Europe has really spread its culture around the world, and now some other cultures are coming to Europe, and it's creating a lot of fear and consternation. Unfortunately, it's creating a lot of bigotry and xenophobia, which is the fear of others, fear of the unknown. But the concerns are real. I was recently in Marseille, in the south of France, a city not necessarily known for being the safest in Europe. And to be honest, I wasn't too excited to leave the train station just because there were armed guards everywhere. The city has a reputation, and had a number of people come up to us trying to get stuff from us, and a number of French people there warning us to watch our valuables. And you see kind of the look on these French people's faces that their country is changing before their eyes, and they're worried about it. And not too long ago, there was actually a stabbing by a North African right at that train station. Now, you might argue that it could have just as easily been at the hands of a crazy French person, and that very well may be true. But it kind of helps you understand the fear that these many of these French have about change. And part of this is just the world that we live in, the world of globalization, and how much change is wrought by the incredible amount of movement of people. So we know that migration has definitely very good and also challenging parts to it for the countries that are sending and the countries that are receiving. And that's going to do it for us. So if you need to go back and look through this, please do so. Jot down any questions and bring them to me in class, and we will get them sorted out. Thanks.